Here my question is this. What is Hanukkah about? And what I want to hear from you is the pop culture version answer. If you were to ask an average person out there walking the street, what is the pop culture answer?
Kids.
Jewish version of Christmas.
Yeah.
Jewish version of Christmas. Very good.
8 days of presents.
Yes. Hanukkah is Jewish Christmas. That's a good one. Anybody else?
8 days of presents.
8 days of presents. That's it. That's good. What are some of the other popular?
Latkes and donuts.
Latkes and donuts. That's what Hanukkah is all about. Hanukkah is what? The festival of lights. So we got to get these types of answers, right? It's the Jewish alternative to Christmas. You absolutely nailed it. Because if Christians have Christmas, then Jews got to have something else. So that's it. Then it's all about presents, it's all about decorations, it's about lights, it's about songs, it's about games, special foods, and of course parties, right? That's what Hanukkah is all about. And if you ask an average person, that is exactly what they will tell you. Now if you dig a little bit deeper and go a little further, what is Hanukkah all about? And now I want, not a pop culture answer, I want a spiritual answer now. Go ahead.
The desecration of the temple by enemies of Israel, and the answer from the Maccabees.
And the answer from the Maccabees. Good. Desecration and the answer, Jay.
The installment of Torah over the non-Torah world.
Torah over non-Torah world. Wow, that's much broader there.
Increasing light in the world.
Increasing light in the world. Another big theme there.
Sort of a second Sukkot.
Sort of a second Sukkot. I like that. Sukkot. Huh?
Dedication.
Dedication. Yes, that's what it translates.
Yes.
Saying no to the world.
Saying no to the world. So these are all good. We're going deeper now, right?
Yeah.
It's not about old Dreidels and Menorahs anymore.
No.
We're going into some serious topics, like bringing Torah across the world, or light to the world, which is essentially the same notion, the same idea. We're going much further now. So what I want you to realize is the spiritual answer out there can be formulated in different ways. I would say, yes, Hanukkah is a festival of lights, and it is about menorah miracle. Don't forget that. That is what Judaism teaches Hanukkah is about. The focus is on the miracle of oil. It's about Maccabee Wars. It's about cleansing the temple, as you mentioned. It is the miracle of oil and an 8-day-long celebration that commemorates those days of the past. Because most Jewish holidays, what do? They look to the past, something that happened. We celebrate something that happened to us, often looking forward to something will happen in a similar way. Or maybe this holiday will keep unfolding in our lives in some greater fullness year after year until Messiah comes. And then it's completely unfolded the way it should be, right? And think about every holiday that we think that's on the calendar. That's kind of how we approach it. And Hanukkah, in that sense, is no different. We have something to look back to. We have something to look forward to. Now, I know that most of you in this room are aware that in the book of John, there's a verse about Yeshua celebrating Hanukkah. That's first century of Common Era. So it was already a holiday. It was already a celebration. And it says that he was in the temple celebrating Hanukkah. So you see, he's in the right place in the first century celebrating Hanukkah. It says that he was walking in Solomon's portico. I don't know if you know where that is, but there was a nice shaded area on the side of the temple plaza where people gathered all the time. And this is where he was walking. It says that he was walking. It was a feast of dedication. And there he was. And it doesn't say anything else. That's it. No more. No dreidels, no menorahs. Okay? The question is, did Yeshua play dreidel? It's not in the book of John, right? The only verse we have that actually tells us something about Yeshua and Hanukkah doesn't say anything about him playing a dreidel. Did he light the menorah? It's not there. It's not in the book of John. So we have a tiny little bit of information, and all we know is that he was in the temple during Hanukkah, and he was walking about and around and doing something. And that was it. So we kind of get left disappointed with that. So the reason why I entitled, sort of say, my a lesson today is beyond menorahs and beyond dreidels, is because there are these pop culture symbols that we have that are always, we associate with Hanukkah, but we have to look beyond them to the history of where it all started, where it all began. And of course, understanding that will help us to understand what it's all about, really. Besides the exterior that we're so used to, because we're completely so commercialized. You know, when you think Hanukkah, images just flood your mind, and all of these images really don't have much to do with the story of Hanukkah. Not so much. So there's another way of looking at Hanukkah that you may not be aware of. So what is Hanukkah all about? How would a historian answer it? You gave me a superficial kind of pop culture answer, and you gave me the deeper spiritual digging into it. So how would you think historian would answer what Hanukkah is all about?
I'd say a power change.
Power
Political
change.
power change.
Political power change. There's a little politics going on there. That is exactly how historians would look at it. They would look at it as struggle, by the way. We've been talking about struggle today, right? It's our Parsha, the name Israel, the one who struggles. Struggles with men, struggles with God, struggles with anyone who comes along. This idea of contentiousness and struggle is actually woven in throughout Judaism. We were always struggling with somebody or something. And Hanukkah is actually no different. It is a story of struggle. And so a historian would look at Hanukkah and would say something like this, that it's a story of Jewish struggle against one another and Greek culture. One another and Greek culture. And it's important to understand how the story, sort of say, unfolds in reality. So the struggle is over what? It's over priesthood. The story of Hanukkah really begins with struggle over who's going to be the priest. It is struggle over controlling culture, who is going to be in charge and who is going to say what Judaism really is and what should Jews do and how they should live. It is the struggle, it is the proverbial struggle of progressives versus traditionalists. Unlike today, right? It's the same exact struggle that we're still going through in our culture. I just want you to think about it. And so that's a historical answer. It's politics, it's struggle, it's power plays. That's how an average historian will look at it. They would skip the spiritual answer that you guys gave me, and they would definitely not go for the pop culture dreidels and menorahs answer, okay? Because that's all surface. So everyone's going to have a different perspective depending where you come from. You're going to see different aspects of Hanukkah. And I'm going to venture a guess that while many of you are familiar with the pop culture version and certainly have heard a lot of really good spiritual things about Hanukkah, I do not know how much of history of Hanukkah you actually know. So what I will do is I'll dive a little bit with you into the history, the way it is recorded in the book of Maccabees, the way it is recorded in Josephus, by the way. So we have some good historical sources that tell us about Hanukkah. But before I do that, I want to introduce something else. Customs of Hanukkah. These are the popular ones. Lighting the Hanukkah. There's no Hanukkah without lighting the Hanukkah, right? It's basically, that's what we do, right? Then there's the dreidels and gelt. Well, you can skip that if you don't like chocolate or something like that, But, most people enjoy some game of some sort. So, latkes and sukkaniot. All right, we definitely got
Can't skip that.
very, very unhealthy habits. I'm thinking, okay, before the New Year's resolution, we eat all the greasy, fattening food we possibly can, so that later we repent and make a New Year's resolution to lose all that weight. That's the culture. Any other customs of Hanukkah that you can think of that are kind of peculiar, fun, and that you really can't go without? What can your Hanukkah not go without?
I think presents would be missed.
Presents, yes. See, I didn't put that in. I was hoping you guys would give me some. I give you like a start, but you got to keep running, So yes, presents. How can Hanukkah be without presents? Family, yeah. See, what fun would it be if you got a room full of presents and absolutely nobody to open them? And you sit there and you open presents all by yourself. And it's like, okay, that's no fun. Like, you can't get even excited about it because you wrapped it up yourself and now you're like, oh, I'm really surprised. So yeah, can't go without it. These are the things that we gotta have for Hanukkah today. Now, the question is, when did these customs begin? Look back. How far can you go with lighting the Hanukkah, Dreidels and Gelt and Sufganiyot? Well, Dreidels and Gelt is easy, right? Because you know Gelt is Yiddish, so that's got to be European culture. So we're talking probably sometime Middle Ages. Latkes Sufganiyot, the whole deep frying things in oil. I'm going to venture a guess that's also a modern culinary idea. Lighting the Hanukkah, how far do you think that goes? Hallel and Shemayer. So that would be the era of Zugot, which would be first century, pre-first century, let's say first century BCE, right? So where did we find that in Talmud? We find that in Tractate Shabbat. It's Shabbat 20, 21, 22, talks specifically about the laws of Hanukkah. And if you start reading that tractate, what it really is about is Shabbat, actually. But then all of a sudden Hanukkah gets in. Do you know how Hanukkah gets in there? The rabbis talk for quite a few pages about what oil can you use to light a Shabbat lamp. What kind of wick can you use in Shabbat lamp? Okay, I know this is all like rabbinic minutia, but it's important, and they're discussing it, and it has to do with trying to do the right thing. And then in the middle of the discussion about what wicks you should use, and what oil you should use, and which oil you should not use, and all of a sudden they start talking about lighting a Hanukkah menorah, because, well, we use wicks and oil for that too. So that gets into a conversation. But here's an interesting part that you may not realize. So Antiochus IV, the story of Antiochus, this war with this overlord from Syria, and the desecration of Jerusalem temple, the story is 168 BCE. That's when this kind of happens, okay? But the oil miracle story appears in the Jewish writings some 100 years later. And the whole Hillel and Shammai, if you read it carefully, it doesn't say that Hillel and Shammai argued about it. It actually says Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai argued about it. Hillel and Shammai were long gone. But their disciples carried on the tradition of them arguing with each other about everything. Well, some things they didn't argue on, but they did have quite a few arguments. So it's actually, if you read the Talmud, it is not Hillel and Shammai, it's Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, who disagree how to light the menorah. Do you light one and increase every day, or do you light them all and decrease every day? So they had disagreements. They had the order disagreements, the how many at once, But that's really how far back it goes. So if you're going to start looking at Jewish documents and looking for evidence of where does this miracle of oil comes in, where does the menorah lighting comes in, it really does not come in until about 5th or 6th century of the Common Era. And that means that the events of the temple desecration and the first mention in Jewish tradition of the lighting of the menorah and oil is quite a few hundred years apart. And so we have no records of any kind of oil miracles up until we read it much, much, much later in the Babylonian Talmud. So that's why I have to say, we have to do a little historical digging and see how this all got, how did we get there? And so all the stories of Hanukkah that I've been looking at in ancient texts actually do not mention the menorah. But they do mention a lot of other things we should know about. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. So, here's the text where it comes from, by the way. If you're curious and you wanted to look at this is Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 21b, and I'm using the Neusner translation. It says, what's the point of Hanukkah? It is in line with what our rabbis have taught on Tanite authority. On the 25th of Kislev, in the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, begin. On these days it is forbidden to lament the dead and to fast. For when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they made all of the oil that was in the sanctuary unclean. But when the rule of the Hasmonean house took hold and they conquered them, they searched but found only a single jar of oil lying with the seal of the high priest. But that jar had enough oil only for a single day. But there was a miracle done with it, and they lit the lamp with it for 8 days. Then next year they assigned these days and made them festival days for the recitation of Hallel and for Thanksgiving. So if you go back, Hanukkah becomes a festival of rejoicing, recitation of Hallel. In fact, there's some beautiful Midrash passage in Pesikta Rabbati that talks about why we sing the Hallel. Like, what's the big deal? Why do we tie Hallel to Hanukkah? Because usually Hallel is tied to Regalim, right? The pilgrimage festivals. But here, the rabbis tied to Hanukkah as well. So what's interesting is here, this is the first time this tradition actually appears. There's nothing earlier than that anywhere that I can find. And this is a single source. All the other traditions of Hanukkah that talk about menorah lightings and oil and things like that are even later than that.